So we are talking about the kingdom Protista, aka Protists today. So, what makes this kingdom so unique and one of my favorites? Well, let's look at it. So, in the kingdom Protista, we are looking at about 20 plus categories. This is the misfit kingdom. So we can actually classify these eukaryotes into fungi-like, plant-like, and animal-like. In fact, if you look back when I was in high school, we won't say how many plus years ago, more than a decade, we'll say, some of these were classified actually as plants or animals, and now we got this thing called DNA testing, and we found out what genomes are, and they are now not in those kingdoms anymore. So we call this the misfit kingdom, but kingdom Protista has evolved and is a good evolutionary step between a prokaryote and our current fungus, plants, and animals, and so they kind of make a bridge step. So important thing to remember, these are eukaryotic organisms, so they do have membrane-bound organelles. That would include mitochondria and chloroplast. They do have cilia and flagellum. They are going through reproduction of some sort, and they are typically, some of them can be multicellular, while some of them are not, which means they can develop tissues and organ systems just like we can. They're just on a smaller scale than us because we're big. So let's talk about the reproduction of protists. So protists can produce asexually through binary fission, budding, and fragmentation. That means the offspring are going to be genetically identical to them. However, they can reproduce, some do reproduce, doing sexual reproduction by the fusion of gametes. I know that sounds pretty hot, right? Fusion of gametes. And their gametes aren't necessarily called male and female. They're positive and negative. Ooh. And so then they fuse together, they make what we call a zygote. That zygote will then develop into what we know as an embryo, aka a viable offspring. So let's just go over asexual reproduction really quick. So binary fission occurs when we would reproduce something by two. Fragmentation occurs when a piece gets broken off, and then budding is like a small little pimple that forms on the outside of that cell and then goes off on there. So this would be binary fission. This is very similar to the process of mitosis, where we're making two daughter cells. They'll go through the process of cytokinesis, splitting that apart. And remember, in mitosis, we go through prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. They do go through something very similar to that to make two identical daughter cells. There is no genetic diversity. Again, yeast would be an example of budding, and this is where you have a larger cell growing and then it pinches off here. Yeast can undergo a fission, as we can see there as well. Let's talk about sex, baby. Okay, so sexual reproduction occurs in response to an environmental stress, which means if they're not stressed, they don't have sex. They won't go through sexual reproduction. Unicellular protists, a mature organism is haploid, and then the haploid cells will divide in binary fission to create haploid gametes, and then the gametes fuse together to make a diploid zygote. Remember, two halves to a whole is how we get diploid. You go through a haploid phase for your gametes and then fuse together to make a diploid zygote. Same thing happens here. And so here's what we do know. Plants will go through alteration of generation, and so do protists, because we have a plant-like protist. So basically, an alteration of generation, it consists of two stages, a sporophyte stage and a gametophyte stage. The sporophyte stage is like the adult stage. So that would be like the adult flower that would form. So if we have like a beautiful flower here, I am bad at drawing, but this would be an adult stage, and that's a sporophyte stage. When we start looking at the gametophyte stage, this would just be like the individual pollen that would blow off into the air, because that would be the sexual reproduction. Again, pollen is found in plants, but same kind of process. Basically, the gametophyte stage is going to be that haploid gamete production. And so we're just producing those gametes, which will then be fused together to make a whole organism, or it will go into a sporophyte. So it'll go from a sporophyte stage, which is an adult, to a haploid stage, which is showing that in there. So again, we said that our Protista can be broken up into about 20 different categories. These could actually be 20 different kingdoms. That's why it's called the misfit. They're characterized by if they share similarities to plants, which would be plant-like, animal-like, and then fungus-like. They evolved with these organisms, so we think there was some type of symbiotic relationship, or these are the bridge organisms between our prokaryotes and our modern-day kingdom Plantae, kingdom Animalia, and kingdom Fungi. So this would be like our bridge kingdom. So let's talk about these different groups of protists that we have. So again, plant-like, animal-like, fungus-like. So grouping protists by kind of how they attain nutrients. So obviously plant-like go through photosynthesis. Animal-like capture or eat other organisms, which means they're heterotrophic. And then fungus-like will actually absorb nutrients. So they'll actually break down other things. They're known as decomposers as well. And so there's three different things. These type of protists, these plant-like protists, they do have mitochondria. And so that's something that's kind of cool about that, because we don't necessarily think about them having mitochondria, but they actually do have mitochondria within there. And so when we start looking at some of this stuff, note that these plant-like, they go through photosynthesis, just like everything else. All right. I love the amoeboids. They're so cool. Okay, so amoeboids or amoeba-like protists, they're a wide variety of organisms. They have what we call a pseudopoda. Pseudo means false, poda means foot. So they actually have a false foot to help them become a little bit mobile. One thing that's really cool about the pseudopoda extends, so we can see these little holes here. They extend through the holes and help the amoeboids to catch food. So they actually catch it like a big net. So they catch food. So they're actually hunting and catching prey, which is really cool. We also have an animal-like protist called ciliates. This is because of the cilia. If we look here, we have this nice little cilia or finger-like projections. This allows for them to move. These are most complex single-celled organisms. They will hunt. So they actually are free-floating and live in water, both fresh and salt water, and then they will move around and they'll hunt their food. Predators, beware. Then we have flagellates. These will have a whip-like structure, and you can see that whip right here. I'm highlighting that so you guys can see it. A flagellum is a single, or you can have a binary flagellum. These guys are parasitic. Flagellates cause something we know as dysentery if you would ingest them. So if you drink water from a stream that has a bunch of these flagellates in them, it's going to go into your digestive tract and cause digestive distress, and that is going to cause you to have diarrhea. Fun fact, not really. Nobody wants diarrhea. Then we have our sporozoum. These guys are protists that will form spores when they reproduce. They lack flagellar cilia or pseudopoda, so they do not have a false foot. They do not have any whip-like structures or hair-like structures to help them move. And these guys are super parasitic. They want to live in a host, and then they will cause awful, horrible diseases. So these are type of protists that will actually get in. They can break the blood-brain barrier. They can get in your digestive tract. They can get into your heart and other places and cause a lot of problems with that. And so we see them having some issues, but they are parasitic, and you will have to take some medications to get rid of this one. Plant-like protists, these guys will go through photosynthesis. They're commonly called photoplankton or algae. So if you ever wonder why I have so much algae growing in my fish tank, it's because we will put them onto slides and watch them. They have a variety of pigment types, anywhere from browns to reds to greens, depending on the type of light that they're collecting. And with that, they are very, very similar to plants. In fact, most of our algae were classified as plants. And the reason that they have chloroplasts is we think is because of the endosymbiotic theory, which means at one time, these guys were a regular little cell, and then they had some cyanobacteria that they ingested, and they went, these guys are helpful. And so now we have incorporated both the plant and animal cell with this. And so it not only has the characteristics of the animals, but of the plants too. And so it does, they really do think that these were able to ingest some material that became useful. And then over long periods of time, we see that. And so we also think that for the animal-like protists as well, we think that they ingested some bacterium that were actually very helpful to them, and then those became the organelles of the mitochondria. But let's talk about these photo-like things. So this is a diatom. These are really cool, by the way. They're unicellular. They have a double-shaped cell. They look like a little box. You can see the cool variety of colors that they can make. They're diploid. They reproduce asexually only, and they are really cool because they'll actually shed that shell. So they'll actually spin like a top because they have some flagellum that stick out, and that's really cool for them. Also, diatoms are sort of abrasive, and they're really tiny. We put them in things like toothpaste and Ajax to clean our sinks and stuff. So diatoms are kind of useful. Euglenoids are really cool. Euglenoids are freshwater protists, so we can actually find euglenoids in our water streams up here. They're photosynthetic. They also have a wonderful flagellum that we can see here, but they can be heterotrophic. And so euglenoids are really, they have a sensitive light organ, and so they're actually able to, so they have a contractile valve here to push out water, and then they have a receptor here, kind of like a little eye, allows them to move towards light. So they'll actually be attracted to light. Dinoflagellates are really cool. These guys spin like a little top. So they have two flagellum that will fit in this little circular thing here. One's coming out this way. You can see one coming out there. And so they spin like a top through the water. They're mostly photosynthetic, but some are heterotrophic. And so they have a protective coating made of silica. And so the cool thing about them is that they'll have these flagella be between those two grooves, and they'll move in a circular pattern. They can move really well through water sources, and they will look out for small other types of protists to eat as well. Then we go into our algae. Red algae is found in warm water. They absorb mostly blue light because that penetrates deep into the water, and so the protists grow at deep within the oceans or within coral reefs. They're really important to coral reef formation because they have symbiotic relationships with coral, and so these guys are really actually very healthy for that. They're not found superficially, though. These guys are found deep within the oceanic waters. Brown algae is what we're most familiar with. This is our kelp. We actually grow kelp and we'll use it in a food supply. It's really quite healthy for us to eat. Kelp has long blade-like structures where they look like leaves. Most of them will only have one tissue type, so they're not really super complex. But kelp can grow really 60 meters in height, so they grow quite a distance. And the great part about kelp is they actually are found in colder waters, and they make habitats for a lot of species. So kelp farms are really important. We have our green algae. This is a very diverse group. They're anywhere from marine plankton to the stuff you see at Mina Lake. The symbiotic relationship with organisms for them is really important. They have the same pigmentation as plants, so they have chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. They create starch just like plants, and they contain cellulose just like plants. They are what we think is the bridge between our modern-day plants and prokaryotic organisms. They do lack complex tissues and layering. These guys, when I was in high school, were classified as plants. They're no longer. They are protists. They are a major part of the food supply, not only for organisms other than humans, but for humans as well. Let's go on to fungus-like protists. These will absorb nutrients from the environment, and they reproduce spores, little black spores that will go into whatever. Okay, so these were all classified as fungi, and now we have done DNA testing and found out they do not classify as fungi. So the first one I'm going to show you is a water mold. This is an example of ick. Ick happens in aquariums. It's parasitic. It happens when you have a temperature change within the tank. So if you get it too hot or too cold and you have a temperature swing, it can happen. It actually grows on the fish when they're still alive. It's a parasite, and it will kill the fish. And then we also know that it is responsible for the potato famine in Ireland in 1846. Ooh. So water molds are really kind of devastatingly horrible for an environment. Donny moles aren't much better. They can decompose dead and decaying organisms, but they can also grow on living things, such as grapes, and corn and other things that fit into that classification. So they'll actually decompose this. They can also be found in aquariums. They're very devastating to a system because once you get a fungus in there, remember, plants do not have an immune system. There's no way for them to fight it off, so they're just devastated by it. Then we have slime molds. Slime molds are really kind of cool. They form spores. They absorb food. They usually are only found on dead and decaying things. We don't find them in other places. They'll grow on dung and all that kind of stuff. They usually have a single amoeboid. Their cytoplasm is kind of neat. They kind of look like a jelly-like substance almost if you see them, and they're really kind of neat. But researchers have used them to understand how cells, how your cytoplasm works within your cell, because they can actually see things move through the slime mold. So they're kind of cool in that sense. So what about protists and humans? So protists and humans are a little bit different. We have a few problems with this, and I'm going to start with the grossest one I feel first, even though they're not going to be in order. Toxoplasmosis. Toxoplasmosis is spread by your cat and by eating undercooked meats that have cysts in them, like pork. So, have you ever heard pregnant women should never change the litter box? This is why. Toxoplasmosis can be in the litter, and then those go into you, and you can actually damage your brain and nerve and eye damage, and it's horrible if you're pregnant and you have this because it will infect your fetus. It is something that's extremely preventable if you go and get your cat taken care of normally. And usually your cat will only get it once. It's not like they'll get it reoccurring in their life cycle, so only once. It can also, they form cysts in undercooked meat, so if you get pork, cook it all the way through, because that cyst can have this little protist hanging out in there being protected, and if you don't cook it all the way through, you didn't kill it, and then you eat it, and then you have toxoplasmosis. It can be really problematic. Amoebic dysentery is another one. This is where you eat an amoeboid or have some type of water. It can also be in food sources, but usually found within water that you would drink that would be contaminated. And it usually is a mild illness that will last for a couple weeks at most. But it causes dysentery, which is a uncontrolled bowel movement. So basically you have watery stools for a long time. Nidarium, this also causes some intestinal cramping and can last for 2 to 3 weeks. This is an intestinal parasite. You have to be treated for this. It can be passed through your poop. That's gross, but it happens. Trichomonas is a sexually transmitted disease. It's kind of gross if you think about that. This is a parasite that lives in water sources, so it will actually swim through the male urethra into the urethral cavity. But for this, most of the time it's passed from men to women. Men, we usually have no symptoms. Women have a calorie discharge. Go get it treated. You don't want this disease for a long period of time. Cryptoplasmosis, or crypto, this is also something that you can get from drinking contaminated water and food. That's why when you go to third world countries, you should actually get, bottled water, boil the water, don't just drink out of the streams. And then we have Chagas disease. This is the kissing bug disease. And with this, it causes heart disease, heart failure, abnormal heart rates, enlarged esophagus, and intestinal tract problems. So this is a problem within the southern United States, but not really in a lot of the portions over here. Then we have our protists in the environment. So they're actually really good for producing nitrogen and also a big part of the food cycle. We typically will see symbiotic relationships with them. Sit down. Stay. Sorry. So how do we use protists in industry? So protists is actually a really important thing for our industry. We make everything from gelatin caps. We actually use algae for that. Foods such as ice cream, salad dressing, and gelatin. Again, algae for that. We use them for cleaners such as toothpaste. That would be our diatoms. And we can use their pigments. We grind them up and use their pigmentation to make road paint. So really kind of an important thing. We also use them in medical processes to test some things on them as well. And so they're really important for this.
Hang on one second.